Hello everybody, EJ here, and this is the first video of 2021, and you are right, it is not an actual specific album review. No, this is a classic albums video, part 7 to be exact. I wanted to start this year off with a classic albums video because this seems to be what a lot of people do a bit of a recap of past albums to start off the year before getting into the meat of the year. And chances are I'm probably going to review the Playboi Carti album first, but needless to say, here are the next 10 albums, in my opinion, that I consider to be classic albums. Now, anybody that knows my videos knows that when I mean classic, I mean it could be anything from before I started this channel to the beginning of time. So I started this channel last year in 2020, so anything before that year is eligible. So today, though, we are going to start with Bob Dylan's Highway 61 Revisited. Well, the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan may be my personal favorite Bob Dylan album, and it may be the one I come back to the most. Highway 61 has grown on me a ton since when I first heard it, and it is an admirable album, and it is arguably one of the most cohesive albums of the 60s and of all time. This is really his rock and more electric debut, the one that caused all the controversy to begin with. This opens up with Like a Rolling Stone, one of the greatest songs of all time, even if it was polarizing to some of the fans at the time. Many thought Bob Dylan had betrayed the folk community by even bringing electric guitar and rock instrumentation into his sound, but on Highway 61 Revisited, he managed to bring his excellent folk songwriting abilities and blend it perfectly with this more rock-oriented sound, and to me it's one of his greatest albums. This folk rock masterpiece wasn't just a milestone in Dylan's career, but it was a milestone in popular music, and very few artists have made albums this important to music since then. So I feel really comfortable putting Highway 61 Revisited by Bob Dylan on my great classic albums list. Jumping ahead to the 1980s, 1982 to be exact, we have Descendents' Milo Goes to College. This is an incredibly influential and solid punk album, and a bit of a hardcore album, that is a major player in the development of not only skate punk, but pop punk as a genre. Now, you could take that either way you want. I'm not the craziest about pop punk, but I do enjoy a lot of skate punk. Tracks like My Age are ahead of their time. For a 22-minute album, this thing packs a powerful punch, and it is full of banger after banger after banger. And My Age, if I remember correctly, it was covered by some skate punk bands. I can't think off the top of my head right now. But needless to say, that is a sound that had been replicated and reproduced time and time again by numerous skate punk and pop punk and local punk bands to this day. This song has a great suburban teen punk commentary, and I still hear the influence of this album everywhere, considering my local punk scene cites Descendents as a major, major influence. You know, it's just packed with killer material, and I love songs like I'm Not a Loser, Hope, and Suburban Home, some of the greatest suburban punk out there. Overall, I think Milo Goes to College is an album that influenced an entire generation of punk, and is in many ways ahead of its time. And continuing down the punk trend, we jump ahead to 1992 with the Gits, Frenching the Bully. This powerful Seattle punk album is one of the most overlooked and underrated punk albums and punk bands of all time. The Gits, led by front woman Mia Zapata, is one of my favorite punk bands of this era. And I think Mia Zapata has had one of the most powerful voices, one of the powerful stage presence, and was one of the best punk frontmen ever. I think that lead vocalist-wise, she's one of the best punk singers I've heard, and it's just sad that she had to come to an unfortunate end when she was unfortunately murdered in 1993. She would have gone on to likely explode alongside Green Day, The Offspring, and Rancid in 1994, but unfortunately, the band wasn't around by then. And on Frenching the Bully, we see some of the most talented punk music out there. We see some of the most groundbreaking punk music out there, and overall one of my favorite punk albums of the 90s. The opening track, Absinthe, has one of the most raw and gritty tones on there. That opening riff is like very out there that you would not expect from a punk band. And overall, it is just it has that great Seattle grungy energy while still being a very unique album that stands alone. And overall, I think that The Gits would have gone on to become a much bigger band, a much more well-known band, but unfortunately they came to a sad demise. But yes, Frenching the Bully from 1992 safely lands on my great classic albums list. And following up is another punk album from 1992. It is the Offspring's Ignition, their second album. This is just pure nihilist punk energy pouring out of this album from every corner. The album came right before their huge explosion of popularity nationwide with Smash, which came out in 1994, another album I love quite a bit. But this is definitely one of the best punk albums to come out of SoCal, and I definitely think that the Offspring really had perfected their sound on here. It is much more raw, it is much more in-your-face, much more well-crafted than their debut album, which is another album I'm quite fond of. But I feel like on Ignition, they really crafted their sound to the best possible package up to this point. And songs such as Dirty Magic, I think, show their perfect, seamless blend of traditional skate punk and hardcore punk elements, along with their sort of grunge influences from bands like Nirvana. And, you know, they blend it together perfectly on Ignition, and it remains, and in my opinion, it remains one of their best albums in their entire career. Because they had yet to really embrace much of the more goofy pop side that they would later go on to embrace on Americana. Ignition is still a really raw, gritty punk album that I think still stands the test of time. Changing genres a little bit, 1994's Jeff Buckley's Grace. Definitely a praised album, and once again, another sad demise of an artist that never was able to really go past this, because unfortunately he died not long after this album was released. Jeff Buckley, one of the greatest voices in alternative rock in the 90s, without a doubt, and this album would go on to become one of the most praised albums of the decade. And unfortunately, the thing that really hurts the most is that I feel like he would have gone on to have a really solid career with a lot of great music, and would have had one of the most solid alternative careers of the 90s, but unfortunately that didn't happen. And on Grace, we see him do very dreamy instrumentals with some great guitar tones, such as, you know, his well-known cover of Hallelujah. I cannot pronounce that song. Hallelujah? I don't know why I cannot pronounce that word. Needless to say, Jeff Buckley's Grace definitely has gone down in history as one of the most influential albums of the 90s, and unfortunately, that's all we have from him. So yeah, I feel really comfortable putting Grace on this list. Next, we have, from 2003, Rufus Wainwright's Want One. I think this is the singer's best album, and with some of his best vocal performances as well. I also think that this album has some of Rufus's most touching lyrics, and some of the best classic arrangements on here. And the song Go or Go Ahead may just very well be my favorite Rufus song. So much pure emotion, the arrangements are just flawless on that song, and his vocal performance is excellent. Throughout this album, great performances from Rufus, great writing from Rufus, and overall, it's a very solid album from both the music and the writing, and I think everybody should check it out. Then we have Bloc Party Silent Alarm from 2005. This is a great post-punk revival album, kind of goes along the same lines that Franz Ferdinand, The Killers, Interpol, you know, all those bands went along. But there's something very emotional about the more clean guitar work on here, and songs like Blue Light, I think, are some of the most touching songs from this entire era. I think Bloc Party really did craft a sound that really made them stand out amongst a crowd with a much more raw, passionate, and emotional sound that I feel like gets lost a lot in this style of music in terms of the energy and the rawness of it, and I feel like they were still able to have that very emotional element, and I think the songs like Blue Light perfectly encapsulate that. Overall, Silent Alarm is an excellent album, and definitely will be coming back to it. Coming in, though, next is Kanye West's 808s and Heartbreak. Speaking of Heartbreak anthems, yes, this album is definitely a very emotional album, arguably one of Kanye's most emotional albums. The innovative use of minimalist arrangements along with the 808s is really the main base for the instrumental here. And the more time that goes by, the more and more I start to see this album get more and more influential, with artists like Travis Scott citing this album as a direct influence. And quite frankly, this is probably my second favorite Kanye album, right behind Yeezus. This is such an influential album on trap and on hip-hop today that its influence goes undenied, from Welcome to Heartbreak, which might just be my favorite song on the album, to Heartless, which is one of his best pop songs. Overall, I think 808s and Heartbreak is one of his greatest albums, and unfortunately, it is ranked much lower on many of the lists, which is unfortunate, because I do think it is one of his best albums. Next up, though, we have Kid Cudi's Man on the Moon, The End of the Day, from 2009. Very good. Spacey, experimental, and atmospheric R&B music. Cudi's music here is very personal and very vulnerable, and it is written in a very poetic way. I love how it's a bit of a concept album, and it is definitely, once again, like 808s and Heartbreak, an influential album that you could hear its influence today without a doubt. It's one of the most influential albums to come out of this time period, and songs like Intergalactic have just a great energy to it, a great passion behind it. And overall, it's arguably Cudi's best album in my opinion, and his most influential album in my opinion. And the last album I'm going to be talking about is relatively recent, and many people do criticize this album, but it is Post Malone's Beerbongs and Bentleys. This may not be the most conscious album or the most lyrically advanced album out there, but in my opinion, it is one of the best pop rap albums to come out of the past decade. It is fun, party music, don't get me wrong, but it is also some of the most well-crafted party music as well. He perfected his sound on this album, with tracks like Rockstar, Better Now, Psycho being worldwide hits. The more you deep into this album, the more you find material that's even better, such as Blame It On Me, one of his most emotional tracks, to Over Now, one of the most intense tracks as well. Overall, Beerbongs and Bentleys, I think, is Post Malone's magnum opus up until this point, one of the best pop rap albums I have heard in a long time, and I think definitely really solidified Post Malone's place in the hip-hop and pop world today. With that being said, those are the 10 albums I wanted to cover. Just because I've been listening to them, I wanted to kick off this year with a classic albums video, because I like doing that. And yeah, expect reviews of Playboi Carti's new album. And other than that, I'm not quite sure yet, but other than that, yeah, that's it for now. And goodbye.